All right, so good morning, everyone. Welcome back to another exciting broadcast with us here at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. I know a lot of you have been joining us all month long, but if you are new to us, we're all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And as many of you will know, we are on this epic space journey this month. We have had 2 NASA astronauts, we've had a whole bunch of amazing engineers from NASA, Canadian Space Agency, and more. We have been featuring the most amazing people on planet Earth working to send us off the Earth. Whether it's satellites looking back at the Earth, robots going to Mars, Europa Clipper mission looking for life on alien moons, it has been a wild ride. You can catch absolutely everything on our YouTube channel, and you can share this one. And when 3 weeks, 3 years down the road, if you want to catch it again or share with family and friends and you're done, everything we do goes there. Lots of opportunity to keep the learning going. Now, today I'm very excited because we're going to a very different place to talk about space today, and that is Tokyo. So joining us at like 10 p.m., this is the joy of these broadcasts, is that we have people from truly all around the world. I'm so pleased to welcome in Flight Director at ispace, Haroon Syed. So he's going to talk to us today about going back to the moon. We haven't been to the moon since 1972. It's been 50 plus years since we've landed people on the moon. We're starting to send some robots back. We're planning these big missions. We're going back. It's a really exciting time for space exploration. So why are we going? What does the moon mission look like? So much more. I'm so excited to welcome in someone who has real firsthand knowledge of what this process is going to look like to explain to you what these journeys are going to entail. So without further ado, Haroon, thank you so much for joining us today and for staying up late just for us. We really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you guys so much too for getting up early and being ready for the presentation.
I know you've got a lot to share with us, so you can dive right in with the presentation, and then I'm so excited for all our questions at the end. So kids.
Okay, let's do it. So today I'm here to talk to you guys about mission operations, and specifically mission operations in the context of going really, really far away, like to places like the moon and beyond. So this is actually a picture that we took during the mission earlier this year. And don't worry, I'll come back to it. But I just wanted to give you guys a taste of some really, really cool stuff that you can do as part of mission operations. Okay, so this is how the talk is kind of going to go. I'll talk a bit about myself and my journey, how I started in the US, and how I ended up where I am now in Tokyo. We'll talk about mission operations, what it really means, what it's like working as a team and solving problems, what it's like planning a trip to the moon, and like all of the different things that you have to worry about as you're planning this trip, right? Because space is hard, going to the moon is hard, a lot of things to worry about. Okay, about me. I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. So if you guys don't know, Detroit is a city southeast of Michigan. There's the Great Lakes. It's a great state. I went to the University of Michigan. Go Blue. I did undergrad there in Aerospace Engineering. I did 6 months at NASA after I graduated. I went back to school to get my master's. Then I moved to Washington, D.C. And in Washington, D.C., that was the first time I worked in mission operations. So that's me over here in this little desk working as an operator, operating satellites. I spent 3 years in Washington, D.C., and after that, I found this cool opportunity at a company called ispace. They were planning to send things all the way to the moon. I've always dreamed about going to the moon since I was a little kid. So I'm like, okay, I'll move to Japan. I'll take this job. I want to go to the moon. So here I am now in Tokyo, and it's been 3 years now since I've moved here. So it's been a while. All right, let's talk about mission operations. And the way I like to think about mission operations is like an iceberg. So it might be hard to see, but this is my attempt at drawing an iceberg. So you have the ice that you can see above the water, right? This is And this is part represents what most people think about mission operations. And then you have all the stuff at the bottom, like where most of the ice is, but a lot of people don't think about. So when you're thinking about mission operations, maybe you're thinking about things like this. You're thinking about rocket launches. You're thinking about spacecraft that are flying through space. Maybe you're thinking about all these celebrations and dances that people have when you have a mission success, right? And you probably see pictures like this with the spacecraft on the surface of another world or moon. And this is all true. This is all part of mission operations. But there's so much more. There's so much that goes into mission operations in order to do all of these different things. So, one is like building the infrastructure you need. And there's two parts to this. One is the actual computers and stuff that you need to control the spacecraft. And the other are these big antennas you need. So these antennas are located all across the world, and you use them to talk to the spacecraft. So these, you point them to where you think your spacecraft is in space, and you can talk to it. And you also do a lot of testing on the ground. You guys might have seen pictures like this from NASA or other space companies where they have these people in these tiny little bunny suits and they're working on the spacecraft. And they're like, they put stuff together, they do a small test, they put another thing together, they do a small test, and they keep repeating. There is so much testing that happens on the ground before the spacecraft is launched into space. And one of my favorite things to do is creating plans. This is the main part of mission operations. How do we get from point A to point B? Point A is Earth, and point B is the moon. So there's a lot of different ways you can get to the moon. There's a lot of different things you need to worry about when you get to the moon, but you need to plan for it. You need to plan for it, and you also need to plan for things to go wrong because space is hard. Things will always go wrong, but you have to be able to solve problems and come up with these backup plans. And another thing is you have to make a lot of tools to deal with the spacecraft data. So when you talk to the spacecraft, it's giving you information back, and you need to understand what the spacecraft is telling you. So you build a lot of these tools with your teammates and you do simulations. So if you look at this picture up here and you see all of this celebration happening, these people have probably practiced that like 30 times. Practice makes perfect, and people practice with things like simulations. And another big thing is solving problems. That's the other half of mission operations. Most of the times, things don't go well, and you're in this big room with a lot of different people, and you're all working together to try to solve a problem. Okay, this next slide is a bit busy. It might be overwhelming at first, but don't worry. We'll walk through the different parts of it, and it'll make it easy to understand. So we're going to talk about planning a mission to the moon and what kinds of stuff goes into that in different portions of it. So don't worry about all this text. It's not important. I just want you guys to focus on three things. The Earth. So the Earth is back over here, the moon, and the spacecraft and how it is traveling through space. So the first thing you notice is over here. So you have the Earth and you have your rocket. So the rocket is how the spacecraft gets into space. So the spacecraft is on the rocket goes into space. Then once you get into space, you separate. The rocket, it goes back to Earth and it lands back on Earth, while the spacecraft, it continues on its journey. And this can be a long time. So in this case, launch happened December 11th. And then you establish a nice normal state. You make sure you are safe. And you begin your journey into space. And along the way, you might turn on your engine. So you guys see this blue fire that's coming out from the spacecraft? That is the engine getting turned on. So throughout the mission, you use your engine to change where you want to go. And you change until you get to the moon. And once you get to the moon, you can do stuff like orbit around it. And orbiting means you just go around and around and around. And eventually you can land. So that's the main phases of operations, right? You have separation. So from Earth, you separate, you launch from Earth, separate from your rocket. You're in space, you're in deep space, and then you use your engine. You use your engine to try to orient yourself to go to the moon. Now let's talk about different ways to get to the moon. There's actually two different ways. The ispace way was the slow way, but most people actually take the fast way. And let's take a look at both of these things. So this is the fast way. So you have the Earth, and again, you don't have to worry about this text. It's not important. You have the Earth and you have the moon. And you have your spacecraft and it launches from here. It launches from Earth and it goes all the way to the moon. And this fast way takes 3 days. This is called the direct approach. And 3 days is pretty fast, right? If anyone wants to guess the slow way, it's really long. It takes 5 months in the slow way. So instead of going straight to the moon like we do this way, instead, you go way out. You go 5 times further out than where the moon is. So in this picture, you have Earth in the middle. So this is Earth over here. And this yellow ring is the moon's path around the Earth. So instead of meeting the moon over here, you go way out. So let's show you how it looks. And remember, every time the moon goes around one time, that's 1 month, right? So this whole process is taking many months to happen. So eventually, the spacecraft goes all the way around and back, and then it reaches the moon. And people do this because it's more fuel efficient. Think of the fast way like driving a Ferrari. Like a Ferrari is really fast, but you're going to use a lot of gas, right? But think of the slow way like a hybrid or like a Prius. You're not going to go that fast, but you're going to save a lot of fuel. So those are the two ways to go. All right. Now I want to talk a bit about the phases of the mission that I showed you before. And one of the most, like the earliest thing I said, right, was separation, when the spacecraft separates from the rocket. And this is actually the most dangerous part of the mission. It's the first 48 hours. And you have to be super careful about everything because in this scenario, the spacecraft is like a little baby and you have to take care of the baby, make sure it's okay. You have to do all of the checkups. You have to work in shifts. You have to work 10 hours and your next team comes in, they work 10 hours to make sure that this baby is okay. You're doing a lot of checkups in this phase. This is actually a picture that was taken during our mission. This is the first picture that we ever took in space. If you look over here, you can see the rocket that we separated from. And if you see over here, you see Australia. We managed to get Australia in this picture. Let me play this video. And this is actually showing separation. This video is taken from the rocket, and this is the spacecraft. So the spacecraft separates, and it starts its journey into deep space. The next thing I wanted to talk to you guys about is lunar orbit. So when you are in lunar orbit or when you are going around the moon, there's a lot of different things to worry about. Again, this is another picture that we took during our mission with the Earth and the moon together. One is communicating with Earth. So how you normally communicate with Earth is you talk directly to the satellite. So we have your spacecraft or satellite, right? And you have an antenna or a radio, and you also have these big antennas all over the Earth. And normally you just point your antenna at the spacecraft and you can talk to it. But what happens if the moon is in the way? If the moon is in the way, the moon is blocking the spacecraft from talking to the Earth. So when the spacecraft is behind the moon, we can't talk to it, which makes it hard sometimes. And we have to wait until the spacecraft comes back out. When it comes back out from backside the moon, then we can start to talk to it. The other thing that happens in lunar orbit is something called an eclipse. And sometimes we see these on Earth a lot, right? When the moon is blocking the sun. So sometimes the spacecraft goes behind the moon, just like here. But in this time, it's blocking sunlight. So this yellow arrow, these all represent sunlight. And the way a spacecraft gets power is through the sun. So they have these big solar panels, right? And the solar panels, they collect the sunlight and they can generate electricity. But when the spacecraft is behind the moon, this is blocked. So it's hard to generate power, which makes lunar orbit extra challenging. And the last little phase I wanted to discuss was landing and also the lunar surface. So landing is the only part of operations where everything has to go perfectly and there's no chance to recover because you're going from tens of thousands of miles per hour down to zero in a matter of an hour, right? So you're in orbit at this part, and at this part, you're all the way down to zero speed. And this is happening in 1 hour. So that whole sequence needs to happen without any input from the ground. So this is all autonomous and has to be executed perfectly. There's no room to fix things or second chances. And then even when you get to the surface, the problems will still continue. So on the Earth, we have a day that is 24 hours long, right? So we get some sunlight, and then you also get no sunlight during nighttime. But the lunar day actually lasts 28 Earth days. So what this means is that you get 14 days of all sunlight and 14 days of pure darkness. So if you guys look at this little video here, and you see the moon, it's orbiting the Earth, right? But look how much faster the Earth is spinning than the moon. The moon spins so much slower. That means that it gets a lot more sunlight during the day and a lot less sunlight during the night. So 14 days of day, like sunlight, and 14 days of nighttime. This means that during the nighttime, a lot of spacecraft will not work anymore because it's too long. 14 days is too long to go without power. And now I kind of want to talk about working as a team. Mission operations is one of those unique jobs where you're always working together with someone else. It's like a sports team where everyone has a different position to play, like a quarterback or a wide receiver, right? And everyone has to play their position perfectly. So this is our mission control center in Tokyo, and this is where we control the spacecraft from. And all of these desks, they have a specific role for different people. And there's two kinds of roles. So one is the main role. So these are people that are always in the mission control center. And I think a good way to think of the mission control center is to think of it like a hospital. Right? So at the hospital, you always have people like nurses, and you have the first responders and like the doctors. They're always there, right? So those are like these people. But you also have support staff, and they come in when we're doing something really exciting or really critical. And these are like the specialists in hospitals. Like if you're doing a surgery, maybe some guy will come in. So these are the support people. And let's just quickly go through some of them. So one is the mission director. The mission director is the one in charge of of the mission control center. And their job is to make sure that everything is happening smoothly. So if problems arise, it's their responsibility to make sure that the right solution is implemented. So they have to know a lot about the spacecraft, and they also have to know a lot about people and their team. Think about them like a quarterback or the coach of a football team. The next position is a really fun one, and it's called the spacecraft controller. And it's called a controller, kind of like a video game controller, because you use it to control the spacecraft. This is the only person on the team that can send commands to the spacecraft. The other position is called operator. The operator works really closely with the spacecraft controller to drive the spacecraft, but also to look at data. So like in this case, we have the spacecraft controller here, and he looks a bit worried, but the operator is there. He's like double checking things to make sure that things are okay. He's like reassuring him. He's like, this is fine. So these guys always work in pairs. You have a spacecraft controller and you have an operator, and they work together. The spacecraft controller drives and the operator checks. So we also have another position called the ground controller. So it's not everything we do is in space, right? We need to talk to the spacecraft, and we talk to them with these big antennas that we point to space. So we need to make sure that these are always pointed correctly, and we need to make sure we have internet. We need to make sure that we have enough space in our hard drives. We need to make sure that nothing goes down. So these people maintain all of that infrastructure. They make it so that mission operations can go without any problems. The next team is called Flight Dynamics, and they're basically our GPS in space. So I'm sure many of you guys on your phones, you have GPS, right? So like if you go outside, you go to Google Maps and you know where you are. But around the moon, that's really hard to do because there is no GPS. So the way we get around that is by using this team called the Flight Dynamics team that tell you where you are. So they predict where you're going to be, and they plan out this path. So this is Earth over here, and they'll plan out this entire path for you. So there's a GPS, and they also give you turn-by-turn directions. Like, okay, at this point, you need to turn right. At that point, like 50 meters ahead, you need to turn left. And they give you all of these directions before the mission even starts. So they're like your GPS and your navigator. And now let's get into some of the support systems. So again, these people are more like the support staff. They're not in the control center every day, but they are there for like the critical phases. The main one of them is called the systems engineer. And the systems person is in charge of basically the whole spacecraft. And they have a general understanding of everything that is happening up here. So they're like a general purpose doctor. They might not know the details of everything happening inside the human body, but they have a good idea of who to talk to if something goes wrong. The next position is called thermal. This one might be easy to pick up on. And what they are just monitoring are temperatures. So the temperatures in space can be crazy. So, okay, in this example, you have your spacecraft here, and you have your sun over here. And the side of your spacecraft that is facing the sun gets super hot, and the side of your spacecraft that is facing deep space gets really, really cold. And you need to make sure that things don't get hot or too cold. Like even in real life, right? Like if you have like a battery and it's getting really hot, it's not good. It might, get damaged. Or if something gets really cold, it's a lot easier for it to break. So you have to make sure that things stay within the proper temperature limits. And this is what the thermal team is doing. They're making sure that it stays just right, not too hot, not too cold, that everything stays okay. The next team is called power, and they are the people that generate charge. So in space, we can't just plug in and charge, right? There's no outlets, but there is the sun, and that's how we get power. So in this case, you have these big solar panels and you have the sun shining on them. So the sun shines on them and you can generate electricity and you can charge your battery. So you can go from a low state of charge to high charge by using the sun. And the power team will always be monitoring this. So the next team is called the software team, and they are basically the computer of the spacecraft. So all of the code that gets written on the spacecraft is done by this team. And we also have a team called propulsion team. So what I talked about before was the engines, right? So you have these big blue fireballs that are coming out of the spacecraft. The propulsion team is the team that is managing this. So you have these tanks that are full with fuel, and you burn the fuel to create this blue fire to propel you across space. So without propulsion team, the spacecraft cannot move around, right? These engines move you through space. One of my favorite teams is called GNC. So we talked a bit about flight dynamics and how they are your navigator in space. They tell you where you are, but sometimes it's hard for GPS to tell you which way you're pointed, right? Like, okay, you open up your Google Maps app, but it's wrong. It's like, okay, you're looking this way, but it's telling you that you're actually this way. And the same thing happens in space. So you need something else. And we have this team that helps us point correctly. And you may ask, how do they do it? Well, they do it by looking at the stars. By looking at the stars, we can tell where we are and what we're looking at. This is the same way that humans have navigated for thousands of years. Before compasses and GPS, people looked at the stars to see where they're going. The last team I wanted to talk about is called avionics. And they basically just do all of the electrical connections. So all the connections on the spacecraft, all of the wires, they are in charge of. And they're also in charge of the radio. So just like your car, spacecraft also have radio, but they are used to communicate with the ground. So this is how we talk to the spacecraft, through a radio. So this is one of my last slides, and I just wanted to reiterate how much mission operations is just teamwork. You practice so much, and you never practice by yourself. You're always practicing as a team. It's just like playing any sport, right? You practice, you go to practice, you practice with your teammates, you get better. And there's always going to be problems that you've never seen before, right? But the practice is there to help make you stronger and to help figure things out faster. And then in that way, you can implement a solution by talking to your teammates and just finding the best thing to do. I wanted to end today just again by showing one of the pictures we took during the mission. This was taken on April 20th, and it actually was taken during a solar eclipse. So you guys see this black spot over here, like all the way, this tiny one over Australia? This is actually a solar eclipse. And I think it's one of the coolest pictures that we've taken during the mission. And when I was young, it was always my dream. Like I always thought I wanted to, work in space exploration and stuff. But I never thought it would be possible for me to go on this kind of journey, especially being so young, like a journey around the moon. And it makes me really excited for you guys. Like there's hundreds of missions to the moon already being planned for this decade and beyond. And by the time that you guys get to college, there's going to be so many opportunities in space. There's going to be so many cool things that you guys can do that we didn't even think about. It's just going to be very, very exciting. And I hope you guys had a good time listening to this presentation. And I hope you learned a little bit about what mission operations is like.
Thank you so much, Haroon, and great detail on all the amazing jobs that you can have and very sort of different roles in the exploration of space. If you want to come out of screen share so you can see us again, have a bit of a conversation, feel free to do that.
Okay.
Ms. Preston's class, we're going to head to you guys for a question in just a second. We're going to do one with everybody, obviously. I wanted to lead with if there's any big difference sort of culturally in the work that you do and how the teams operate together that you've seen having been in diverse different space agencies over your career. I'm really curious.
It's a very good question. So the team that we have at ispace is very international. So it's like 50% Japanese and then 50% people from all over the world. So you have Europeans, you have people from all over Asia, you have Americans. So you have like a mix of different space cultures, which makes it really nice to work at. The mission operations environment actually wasn't too different from the one I was used to in the US, because I think a lot of like the common practices are very similar. So
Yeah.
it was very easy in that way to go from America to Japan. There's only like a
Nice.
few things that were different.
I like the international look too. I grew up in Toronto, so anytime we have sort of tons of people from different places working together, it tends to lead to some really cool stuff. And I love that as part of the scientific enterprise generally. So thank you for that answer. We're going to head to Miss Breton's class, and then Gateway Grade 6s, you guys are next. We're going to do everybody, don't worry. But Miss Breton, if you want to unmute your mic, come on up and take us away with a question. You're good to go.
Yeah. How expensive is it to go to the moon?
Yes.
It
That's a
is
nice question.
it is really expensive. So it also depends on if you're going the slow way or the fast way, right? So if you're going the fast way, it's a lot more expensive, maybe like $50 million. But if you're going slower, it's a little bit less, maybe like $30 million. But it's still expensive, and the cost is expected to get lower and lower soon. But it's on the order of around $50 million for a mission to the moon.
I love this question. So, Haroon, you don't know the context of this, but up until about a year and a half ago, only grade 10s and up asked about price. And now it's like every class is like, how much do these things cost? And I always like to highlight that these things, they're big numbers. I mean, most of us will never see $50 million in our entire lives. It seems like an unfathomable amount of money. However, compared to like all the science and research and exploration we do in space is such an infinitesimal fraction of the money we spend on pretty much everything else that it's quite astonishing. I mean, one helicopter or plane for the military is like 20 times that much to go to the moon. And that's an astonishing fact. And we have thousands and thousands and thousands of those and fairly few moon missions in the scheme of things. So as we start shifting these priorities and emphasize exploration a little more, these big volumes are actually a drop in the bucket compared to what we could be doing to explore and do research. So I love that question. Thanks for kicking us off with that. Gateway Grade 6s, unmute your mic. Come on in. Everyone can unmute their mic. When you're in the background, I can't hear you anyway. I promise. But you guys are good to go.
How many space missions do you help with per year?
Ooh.
So our company does one per year. So this was our first mission. So I started 3 years ago, and we've only like the company was been around for 10 years, right? But this was the first space mission. But from now on, there's gonna be more and more. So next year there's gonna be one, and then after that there'll be another one. So basically every year there'll be a new mission.
It's funny because I guess, from a kid context and in general with projects, it's like, oh, you're working on many things all at once. Actually, one per year is quite a bit. We've been featuring a lot of engineers over the last little bit working on things like the James Webb Space Telescope, where they were working on that for a decade, like straight.
Oh, yeah.
And that's very standard for big missions in terms of space exploration. So it sounds outlandish. I mean, you're in grade 6 now, so think about doing something for 10 straight years. But it's this incredible project with a payoff like things that we found with Mars rover, with James Webb Space Telescope, just a few smattering of examples over our first few weeks. So thanks for that, man. Miss McElhenney's class, I'm heading to you guys next. Miss Marshall and Miss Wong, your guys' mics are off. If you flick them on, I'll know that you're good to go for questions. But come on in and take us away, grade 3s. Hi. Hello.
Hello.
I don't think we can hear you. I think your mic is on, but it's not actually connected somehow or other. This is how the fun. Well, you know what we're gonna do? I'll say a quick hi. Type your question in the chat on the side, and I'll pass it along to Haroon, okay? But so nice to see you. Your mic, yeah, perfect. Play around with it and share the question in the chat. Miss Wong just flicked on the camera, so I'll come to you guys next. Unmute your mic. Come say hi. Hi.
Go ahead. What do you have to do exactly to work with NASA?
Ooh, what do you have to do?
It's a great question. So a lot of people think that you have to study aerospace engineering if you want to work for NASA, and it's not true. I think the most important thing if you want to work for NASA is you have to be passionate about space. But you can have different interests. Maybe you like math, maybe you like science, maybe you like writing, maybe you like journalism, right? There's so many things that you could like, but you can still work for NASA. It just really depends on how passionate you are about space. There's many different kinds of jobs you can get at NASA. So don't worry if you don't think you want to be an engineer. That's okay. You can still work at NASA. You can still work in space.
We had Kevin De Bruin on yesterday talking about this. And I mean, if you want to be a lawyer, a business person, an artist, like all these roles, a doctor. I mean, astronauts and space personnel need medical personnel to help them do the work that they do. There are thousands and thousands of people that work at organizations like this. So if you're interested in space or ocean or whatever exploration, you do not need to be a PhD genius engineer or scientist. Like that is, it's something that I thought when I was a kid. I think a lot of our students think. It's really important. If you love this stuff and you keep applying yourself, you can end up with a really, really cool role. So thanks for that question, man. Ms. Marshall, I'm heading to you. Ms. McElhenney class, type in the chat. I don't think your mic's going to work. I will come and check, but type in the chat just in case. But Ms. Marshall, come on in. Hey, grade fives.
Have you guys ever been to the moon?
Ooh.
So physically, no. Sadly, no one's been to the moon in the last 50, almost 60 years now, right? I think the last time someone's been on the moon was 1970 something.
72.
So it's been a long time.
Yeah. But we've gone around it and we've landed things on it. So we have landed some things on the moon in the last few years. China put a space probe on the other side, had a little plant in it, which is very cool. And we are planning to go back to land people there, I think in 2025, if I'm not mistaken. I know the Artemis mission to go around it with astronauts is next year. And then 2025 planned that we're going back to the moon, which would be the coolest thing ever. I can't.
And stay this time, right? So it'll be good.
Ms. McElhenney's class, I'll check in. Let's see your mic, maybe, kind of, sort of. No, I don't think it's going to work. Share in the chat. Just type to me in the private chat right on the side, okay? And we'll get questions. I'll type there for you. It's right on the side of the screen, and then you can share with me there. I want to make sure we get a question from you guys. I know the mic's giving you problems, but Ms. Bretton's class, we're going to come back to you. If you guys have a second one, we're going to do a whole other round. This Haroon is like a super speedy Q&A guy.
Do you guys have an estimated size of space, or does it just keep growing?
Woo!
That's a really good question. It is growing. So the universe is expanding, and it's expanding at a really fast rate. I don't know the exact rate, but it is growing.
Yeah. It's one of the coolest, most counterintuitive things we ever learned, I think, in the history of space exploration and sort of using telescopes is that it is getting bigger. That's really weird. It seems, and when you really think about the geometry of the universe and how we fit within it, it's so outside of the realm of human expertise as to be almost meaningless for everyday action. But I love that we got that question. Thanks, guys. Gateway grade 6 is coming back to you. And then Ms. Wong, you're next. Come on in. Take us away. Well.
Would you ever want to go to space?
That's a great question. I would. I think I would love to go to space. Maybe right now it would be a bit uncomfortable, right? Because there's things like zero gravity, there's a lot of radiation. But I think in the next 5-10 years, things will start to get a lot more comfortable, right? It'll get a lot safer. And I think at that point, I would want to go to space because it'd be cool to see stuff like this, right? It'd be cool to see like another world and see Earth from really far away. So I think I would want to go to space.
Almost everyone we feature in the space realm would want to go in some fashion. Most people have said no to Mars, but almost everyone we've talked to ever has said yes to the moon and yes to just orbiting. And for what it's worth, I mean, your best shot still is to train, get the expertise, become an astronaut, go into space in some fashion. There are space tourists now. Like that has begun, which is really interesting. Now it's really expensive. I think it's still $10 million or something like that to go to space. But in the future, hopefully we get a lot cheaper and more of you will have that opportunity. Bennett in Ms. McElhenney's class, thank you for sharing that question. Wants to know about Mars. Will you be going to Mars? Will your organization be going to Mars? What's going on with the Red Planet?
Oh, that's a great question too. So our organization is more like a stepping stone to Mars. So we're treating the moon as like the stepping stone, right? So like a lot of infrastructure and build up on the moon for an eventual step to Mars. But we're not planning any missions yet to Mars. But some other companies are, like SpaceX and other companies, they are planning missions all the way to Mars.
It's a really interesting time, and I always like highlighting the difference between the moon and Mars because I think, there's this tendency to lump them as like things in space. The moon is really close compared to Mars and really technically feasible, and we have been there, and it's a very different set of things that you need to be able to set up something on the moon. So we still need to prove that we can do that very well before we're probably thinking about major things on the Red Planet, which is a month several months long journey as opposed to several days. Worth noting the difference in scale there. But I love that question. Thanks, Bennett. Miss Marshall, I'm going to head to you, and then Miss Wong will wrap up with you guys. Time flies and you're having fun. I will take Libby's question too, so that we get 2 from every class as well. Miss Marshall, come on in. Hey, grade 5s.
How long does it take to plan a moon landing?
Ooh.
Oh, that's also a very good question. It took us a really long time. It took us like 3 years to plan a moon landing because there's so many things that can go wrong. And you have to worry about them. Like, okay, if this goes wrong, how are you going to handle it? If this goes wrong, how are you going to handle it? So it takes a long time. But once you do the initial planning, right, like the first mission took a long time to plan, but then the next missions, they get easier because you've already learned a lot of things on the first mission. And then the subsequent mission, like the next missions, right, they get a lot faster.
I love this, and the scale again seems so outlandish, but as you said, so much can go wrong. There's a reason that rocket scientists and brain surgeon are like the sort of paragons of like a difficult job, because there's almost no margin for error. And so thanks for that question, Ms. Marshall's class. Ms. Wong, I'm coming to you in a second. I'd like to wrap up with a live class. Libby in Ms. McElhenney's class wants to know how many times have we launched, or you launched, a rocket to the moon. If you want to extend that to generally, you're welcome to.
Okay, so this was our first mission. So this is the first time we've ever sent anything to the moon, right? So it's crazy that it's even gotten this far. This was actually the second commercial mission ever. So basically until now, all the missions that have gone to the moon have been government missions. Like you have NASA, you have the Japan Space Agency, you have Russia, China, India going to the moon, right? But not a lot of commercial or like private companies until now. And from now on, there'll be more of those.
Yeah. Again, it's such an interesting time. There's so many different players in the space place right now. So if you want jobs in these fields, kids, again, the world is your oyster. It's fantastic. Ms. Wong, we're going to wrap up with you with one final question. And then, as always, we're going to bring in everyone for a big thank you and farewell. But Ms. Wong, wrap us up, guys.
How do you take pictures in space?
I like that question a lot. So we have a camera. We made a special camera. This is a 4K camera to use in space. And this is actually very similar to a camera that you can buy like at, I don't know, like Target or Best Buy. Like
Cool.
It's not like a super special camera just made for space. It's like it's very similar to a camera that you can get here.
Really?
And then using it is the hard part, right? Because you have to make sure the sun is in the right place. You have to make sure that the moon is in the right place and the earth is in the right place. So it's hard to plan the picture. But once you plan it, you can get some good stuff.
The speed of things in space and how quickly they move. Imagine trying to take a picture out your car window. So famously, when they landed Apollo 11 on the moon the first time, it like blew over the flag that they put down, and they didn't get a proper picture of it. So it took them a lot of math to figure out, okay, how are we going to track the camera so it actually follows the spacecraft? A lot of sort of detailed engineering and science goes into that, which is very cool. So thanks for that question. We've never had that question in our history in space programs. Haroon, is there any final message you want to leave our kids with before we bring in everyone and say goodbye? This has been such a fun program, but anything you want to leave them to inspire them a little further, go for it.
I've just been really happy to hear all these questions. Like, these are such smart, intelligent questions. And it makes me so happy to like know how interested people are about space, like especially like young kids, because this is going to be your future, right? Like it's so nice to hear.
Yeah. This has been a particularly, I must say, having done like 1,500 broadcasts, you guys are an amazing audience today. So thank you for your thoughtful questions, your research, everything else. Haroon, what we do to wrap up every broadcast, I'm going to bring in all our classrooms to say a big thank you and farewell. So Gateway Grade 6s, Miss Breton's class, Miss Wong, Miss Wong.